We have a very special guest in studio, someone I'm going to be working with on Saturday, and someone you are all no doubt familiar with, Jodie Emery, cannabis activist, civil liberties advocate, public speaker, and welcome to the Nightside. It's great to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So let's start by talking about this event that we are doing together on Saturday. It is at the Canadian International AutoShow, and it's a panel called Cannabis and Cars. And you're on the panel, and I'm the moderator. And on the panel with you is going to be someone from the Colorado Department of Transportation. We've got an OPP sergeant, we've got a toxicologist, and a lawyer for MAD Canada, and Jodie Emery.
Very high-profile type people, it sounds like.
Yes, it does. You know, I was really impressed when I was asked to do it because I think, A, it's a very important conversation that we're going to be having about cannabis and cars, and also a star-studded panel. So I think that's fantastic. Now, when you came into the studio, we just started talking about this. It's in the news tonight. And I'll just let our listeners know, although they've been listening to the top of the hour news, leaders in the Senate have reached a deal on a timeline for the legalization of cannabis, and it pushes the start of retail sales past July 1st, which was a date that had been floated. It looks like now they are going to be voting on Bill C-45 on or before June 7th. So what does that mean for our listeners?
Well, I find it very upsetting because legalization has been floating around since 2012 when Washington State passed it. And the idea behind legalization is to stop arresting Canadians for cannabis. It should not be a crime anymore. And to stop criminalizing the existing industry that's worth billions of dollars already supplying the demand. And to stop spending law enforcement money, hundreds of millions of dollars, going after an industry that should be legal. So unfortunately, this Liberal government has been putting off any sort of justice, any sort of amnesty or moratorium, even though Bill Blair and Justin Trudeau both admit that marijuana arrests disproportionately target the poor, people of color, minorities, marginalized groups. They admit it's one of the great injustices in this country, and yet they refuse to stop making these arrests. So number one, regardless of when retail sales come into play or who gets to make the money selling pot, we need to stop arresting people. So the Senate's delay shouldn't delay justice for all of the victims of prohibition and the Canadians who still suffer.
Okay, so but we're talking about a couple of different things in terms of legalization and decriminalization being two different things, but also with the Washington and Colorado model, you mentioned passed in 2012, but at least in Colorado, not legalized until 2014. So what are we looking at here? When do you consider passed? Is it this vote that we're waiting on?
Well, I suppose when that vote passes, we could say that's when legalization is official, but it really will be a transition time. We're ending a decades-long prohibition policy that affects every part of our lives. And so that's not just going to change overnight. But again, the main issue is to stop arresting people. The second issue is to stop wasting law enforcement spending. But what's interesting about the name, Bill C-45, well, some say, why did they come up with that number? In fact, right now under the CDSA, the cannabis laws that exist, there are only 8 different offenses. Under the Liberal government's C-45, there are 45 new cannabis offenses, some of them with even tougher penalties, equating cannabis to terrorism or child pornography. So I question what the Liberals are saying and doing when they keep coming at this from a very prohibitionist angle about restricting and limiting access, about tough new laws. So part of me almost doesn't want this Bill C-45 to pass because I'm worried about the very negative aspects of it. But the other side of me says this is long overdue. And it's wrong to keep holding up justice where it's meant to be delivered.
So it's pretty amazing because Jodie Emery has become the cannabis crusader, which, I mean, you really are. And your knowledge is incredible. And you have really taken a step forward in terms of you and your husband owning cannabis culture. And you have recently, within the last few months, gotten into trouble and shut down all the cannabis culture locations. But you are really out there talking about it and sort of the voice for the cannabis advocacy movement. Had you always pictured yourself in this role?
Absolutely not. In fact, when I was in high school, I was against marijuana. I was against drinking.
No.
Teacher's pet. I loved cops. I was a leadership student. I was going to go to law school and be prime minister one day. I'm not striking that out yet. But, but when we look at where I changed, it was because my best friends were smoking pot. And I realized they weren't stupid. They weren't idiots. In fact, they were the smartest kids in my class. And they read Cannabis Culture magazine and watched Pot TV. So this is back when the BC Marijuana Party was running a full slate of candidates in 2001, 2002. So marijuana activism came to me in a very strange way in that I started to question authority. And for many, they say that's why marijuana is illegal, is it makes you kind of question authority and the status quo and think outside the box.
Oh, so did you start to question authority when you were using marijuana?
As soon as I started consuming cannabis, I said, what else are they lying about? But this is actually very important to take note of. So when we talk about drugs and drinking and things that teenagers are going to interact with and do, I was against all of it. I was really against anything teenagers did. I thought it was all bad and reckless behavior. But I realized that when they lied to me about cannabis being really dangerous and addictive and all these things they said, I didn't believe what they told me about other drugs. And that was how this gateway opened, where I thought, well, if they're lying about cannabis and I have all this research on the internet and all these studies showing that what the government is saying isn't true, what else are they lying about?
Okay, let's pick one thing, because you are a wealth of information. Let me just pick one of the things I've read, which is the dangers of people, let's say, under the age of 19, smoking too much and the effect it can have on the brain. Is that not a danger?
It's not as much of a danger as people think. So we need to look at the risk of all the substances people are using. Obviously, alcohol is extremely destructive and contributes to crime. And I think if I was a parent, I'd be more worried about my teenage daughter going to a house party with a keg than going to hang out with her friends smoking pot, because we know that alcohol is very dangerous and harmful. And teenagers, of course, their brains are developing, but it's wrong to say that brains stop developing at age 25. And as soon as you're 25, you're a full-grown adult. We all develop at different times and in different ways. And when you're looking at the drugs that actually affect young people's brains, think of all the young boys and girls across our country being given Ritalin and legal speed and legal drugs of all kinds, including myself. I was on antidepressants for many years, and we know out of studies showing that those cause suicide. Those cause harm to people. And yet doctors are giving out these drugs to all sorts of young people. And let's not even touch on the opioid crisis yet. But when we're talking about the harm to teenagers, marijuana is the least risky substance. And for those who are predisposed to schizophrenia or psychosis, they may be more inclined to have onset. But I also have studies from the British government and from all sorts of groups, and I share them on twitter.com/Jodie Emery. But it shows that teenage brains are not being negatively impacted by cannabis. And even chronic users don't have harm later on in life. And the psychosis spectrum issues, like when you have these instances where you have psychotic episodes, it's not connected strictly to cannabis. It's often connected to those who use cannabis and cigarettes or alcohol as well.
Okay, we're going to take a break. Jodie Emery is here. We've got lots to talk about. We're also going to remind you about our appearance together this weekend with a whole panel of interesting people. I'm actually not one of the interesting people. I'm just moderating the event, but it's going to be Cannabis and Cars at the Auto Show this Saturday. Jodie Emery, cannabis activist, is here. Jodie Emery is going to be on a panel that I'm moderating at the Canadian International Auto Show this Saturday afternoon at 1. The panel is called Cannabis and Cars. And we're going to be in the South Building, room 801. I'm really looking forward to it. And, you know, I was asking you in the break, Jodie, if you find, because you're always out there talking about marijuana, talking about cannabis. Do you ever feel like you're kind of being ganged up on in situations?
Well, I am definitely an activist in the grassroots. I've been marching in the streets, holding up protest signs. So some people see me as kind of combative, but I'm not. I'm actually very peaceful and kind and engaging. And I was reminded, though, that in Vancouver, they've known me well as a magazine editor and a political candidate. Out here, I kind of made a big splash with our grand opening of shops back in 2016. So I can see why people are a little concerned about me. We do have debates, but I'd like to have the discussions. I remember a few years ago, I said there was no more debate. There was no argument over cannabis. It was going to be legal, and that was that. But we've recently had a resurgence of some reefer madness hysteria, so I'm excited to take that on.
All right, we're going to take some calls. Now, whenever I have anyone on, and I've talked to people who are in the wine business, I always do the same thing, so this is with the utmost respect. Do you use marijuana every day?
I do. Yes, I do. And I enjoy using it. It's my anti-stress medicine. It's what I use instead of antidepressants. And I don't drink much, an occasional glass of wine, but cannabis for me, it saved my life. And many people say the same thing.
And is it always in the same form, or do you use it in different forms?
I prefer smoking joints, classic old school Jodie's joints, maybe one day in the future that'll be my thing. But I used to hit bong all the time, like a really big bong. That's a glass pipe with water in it. But I'm not a young kid anymore.
Right. Do you have a question or comment for Jodie Emery? Really thrilled to have her here tonight. Hi, Patricia. Go ahead with Jodie.
Oh, hi, Jodie. I just want to say I have a lot of respect for you. I, myself, am not a big smoker. I like the wine. A lot of my family and friends smoke. And my question is, we hear about legalizing marijuana, but I'm curious because I like the occasional hash joint. Is that included in the legalization? Or?
What a great question. That's really interesting.
Well, it's always an interesting discussion because hash, traditionally, like Moroccan hash, imported hash, a lot of what the East Coast always used to smoke, and with tobacco, in fact, before buds became more popular, that hash is just basically the plant matter rubbed into a resinous form. And now we have other types of extracts or concentrates like shatter or dabs or butter. People are hearing these terms nowadays. And that hash and hash oil extracts, that's kind of new and different. So the government isn't really sure how to approach it. That's why edibles aren't going to be legalized yet. Edibles basically have extracts and hash oils baked into them. But when you're looking at the court decisions, now we had the R.V. Smith decision, and that was at the Supreme Court where they legalized oils and extracts and edibles because patients shouldn't be forced to smoke plant matter if they can use it in a tincture or a cookie or an edible instead. And that's in the pipeline, I believe, excuse the pun, but I do think that it is coming. Everything should soon be legal, but when we're looking at the specifics of edibles, that's apparently being introduced later.
All right, let's see what Angelo has to say. Hi, Angelo, go ahead.
Hey, how are you doing this evening?
We're good, thanks. Go ahead with your comment or question.
Okay. So I don't smoke. I smoked for years before, but it's just not for me anymore. My question, though, is about CBD oil. As you know, Facebook always tells the truth. I saw a post saying it removes a lot of symptoms for a major category of ailments. Is there any truth to that? Is there any side effects? And can you take that daily? It says take a drop in the morning, a drop at night.
All right, Angelo, thanks for your question.
Well, a lot of people are hearing about CBD lately. And in the past, we mostly talked about THC because that's what made cannabis what it was. But CBD is one other cannabinoid. And there are many of them. There's also CBN and THCA, and there are quite a lot. But CBD is popular because high CBD strains have been very useful for people with epilepsy and other ailments of a physical nature and in neurological ailments like epilepsy, as mentioned. So CBD oil has a very high CBD content rather than THC. That means you won't have as much of the psychoactive feel-good effect of THC. You'll have more of the therapeutic medical qualities of CBD. And it is safe to use every day. Cannabinoids, it's kind of hard to say sometimes, but cannabinoids are part of our evolutionary history. Our bodies have an endocannabinoid system, and this is being studied by doctors now with great interest because we have cannabinoid receptors in our brains and in our bodies. And most of the time, those receptors, when they receive cannabis of various types, they affect you in different ways. So it can relax your physical ailments of Crohn's disease for many people, or you can use the THC high strains to also have therapeutic effect, especially for those who are going through chemotherapy and cancer treatment. All of the cannabinoids are good. So our bodies evolved with cannabis to receive it and use it in every way. But it doesn't mean you all have to smoke it or consume it, but it's not going to harm you. There's no toxic level. There's no deadly dose.
All right. Believe it or not, we're almost out of time. Let's try to sneak in another call. Hi, Sam. Go ahead quickly with your question.
Yeah, quickly, it's not a question, it's a comment. Do you agree with me that maybe when it comes time to finding out if people should drive on the influence of marijuana, I've known all my friends and all the people that I've known, half of them are so paranoid they can't even operate any kind of machinery, and the other half go, oh no, I can totally drive on marijuana. I think my comment is right now we should make it illegal for everybody, for those maybe 50% of people that can't drive when they're under the influence of marijuana, and some little thing on the highway will make them make a wrong decision and probably kill someone. What do you think?
Well, cannabis and driving.
That actually was a question.
Topic.
No, let me tell him. That wasn't just a comment. That was a question.
Yeah, the question is cannabis a big concern for impairment? Well, you just hit the nail on the head by saying those who get paranoid know that they can't drive, and they decide with proper judgment not to drive because they're not capable. And everyone else is perfectly fine. You have the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration studied it and said cannabis use does not increase crashes. You have the American Automobile Association saying that THC limits do not relate to impairment. You cannot actually measure it that way. The American Journal of Public Health said that crashes do not go up. So responsible driving, very important. No matter whether it's pharmaceutical drugs or being tired or being angry or distracted by your phone, don't drive unsafely. And if you feel like you can't, then don't. But for the vast majority of cannabis consumers, they can and do drive safely, especially medical patients who depend on cannabis to help them get out and do their daily lives.
That is a point that is going to be heavily discussed Saturday afternoon when Jodie Emery is on the panel, Cannabis and Cars. I will be moderating the panel. It's Saturday at 1 o'clock at the Canadian International AutoShow. We're going to be in the South Building in room 801. I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, so am I. We'll see you there.
Yeah, see you then. It was nice to have you in. Jodie Emery.